If you turned on the NFL this year, the quarterback rankings would look a little bit like this. Somewhere in the top 5, you would have like Patrick Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Jackson, something like that, with that 5th spot probably being flexed between a handful of QBs. Then in your 5 to 10 ranks, it would consist of another set of guys like Matthew Stafford, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, and Justin Herbert. Now this might be a little bit of a cold take or common knowledge if you know ball, but one of those guys was not like the others, and that man is Baker Mayfield. You see, just a few years ago, Baker was probably on his way out of the league. He had been traded to the Panthers, where he wasn't even the outright starter, but battling for a job with XFL star PJ Walker and former first-round pick Sam Darnold, where in that season he would ultimately get waived by the Panthers. So how did we get to where we are now, with Baker being a consensus top 10 quarterback? Well, to get there, dear viewer, we are going to have to go back. And I'm going to take you to the only logical starting point for any Baker Mayfield story, and that was his college career, because Baker, despite how hard I have glazed Joe Burrow, is actually my real favorite college quarterback. Now, I remember when I was at A&T and I saw Baker Dougie, and I just thought to myself, damn, I need to learn how to Dougie. I did not. I never learned how to Dougie. But between that, the crotch grab, the flag plant, Baker was really how I imagined myself as a punter. Except he was actually good at what he did at the time, and I just wasn't. I was still a backup. But eventually, even when I did end up finding that success, a little bit of that confidence exuding from me, a little bit of that swagger, I was still trying to get some of that Baker Mayfield energy, even though ultimately I ended up sounding more like an excited Kirk Cousins than Bake.
And I'm like that! You like that!
But after a successful collegiate career, leading some of the most prolific offenses of all time, being a Heisman candidate 3 of 4 years, and winning it in his final year, everybody just knew he was about to be a consensus first pick. The only question was who was going to be the one getting him, and in this case, it was like Nemo finding out that he was going to the Darla of the NFL, the Cleveland Browns, who for the past, 2 decades now, have been having quarterback struggles. To put it nicely, since 2000 to 2017, they have had 44 different quarterbacks play for them, and 4 of those guys they drafted in the first round, as very few lasted more than just a single season before being declared a bust and being shipped off. And it was looking even more bleak as the Browns were coming off a very rare, completely defeated season, which was followed up by a completely almost defeated season where they got a single win, which was following a 3-13 season that happened to be 8 years away from their last winning record season in 13 years from their last playoff appearance. At this point, it seemed like there was just nothing that could possibly save the Browns. But Baker would come in, and I don't care what anybody tells you, he was going to play his freaking heart out. From 3 years in a row of being absolute bottom feeders, Baker would do the unthinkable. It was week 3 against the Jets. The Browns would go down 14-0 in the first half, while Tyrod Taylor just couldn't seem to get anything going on offense, and they would finally pull the trigger. And in his first drive, in the last 2 minutes of the first half, he would get the Browns into field goal range for their first points and start the turnaround of a lifetime. He would finish the game putting up 201 yards in a little over a half of football, while Taylor only put up 19 yards leading up to that point to pull off the comeback win. The following week against the Raiders, he would have a slight hiccup, only throwing for 295 yards, 2 touchdowns to couple the 2 interceptions in a tough overtime loss before pulling out a gutsy overtime win against the Ravens, where Baker led an amazing 7-play, 65-yard drive to hit the go-ahead field goal and dodge tie number 2 of the season. And while things we wish would stay like this, they would drop 4 of their next 5 games with spotty performances from Baker, but after their bye week, man, he would end hot. I'm talking about going 3 for 5 and throwing for over 350 yards in 2 games. And yeah, he still had some slight interception issues, but he'd throw for 27 touchdowns to just 14 interceptions, and the Browns finally breathed a sigh of relief as they had found their guy. Now in 19, it would be a classic sophomore slump. He would throw for 22 touchdowns to 21 interceptions as the Browns would go 6-10, but that down year would light a fire under Baker to step his game up, and man, COVID year Baker was special. Despite getting absolutely thrashed by the Ravens in week 1, he would tear through the Bengals, Commanders, Cowboys, and Colts before the Steelers would also smack them around. Then he beat Cincy, lose to the Raiders, but the back half of the season and their first winning record and playoff appearance in over a decade in sight, he would be electric, slicing and dicing his way through competition, and if his defense wavered, he'd step up and make up for their mistakes, outscoring the Titans 41-35 and requiring a last-minute trademark Justin Tucker 55 game-winning field goal to lose by just 3 to the Ravens. Oh, by just 5. Man, I wonder how many people lost money on that final play, huh? But not just that. In their final game, sitting at 10-5 and needing to knock off a red-hot Steelers in order to get into the playoffs, we had just some beautiful, tight, and precise play from Baker that would get them to a 24-9 lead that the Steelers simply could not surpass, as the Browns were in the playoffs for the first time since 2002, where they would immediately have to turn around and take on the real Steelers since they were no longer resting their starters. But this time, it wouldn't be nearly as close, because the Browns came out and smacked the Steelers to open the game up. Yeah, their defense was playing out of their mind, getting 3 picks and a fumble recovery touchdown, but at the end of the first half, it was 35-10, where all they had to do was coast out to victory once again on the back of just an incredibly clean game from Baker, throwing for 263 yards and 3 touchdowns. But winning a playoff game and beating the Steelers and now having to take on the Chiefs in their final form, it was just a little bit too much for the Browns. Mayfield would play alright, but it was a grindy defensive game with the Browns having a real shot to win at the end but coming up short. However, at this point, nobody thought the Browns were ever going to move on from Baker. 26 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions, taking the Browns out of essentially poverty and having the best QB rating of his entire career, people pretty much thought that he had a blank check from the organization. That was until 2021, the final year of his rookie contract, where he would play against the Texans after throwing a pick, make the tackle, but injure his shoulder. From there, he would pop it back in and go 10 for 10 on passes, but with some obvious ailments. He would then continue to play until against the Cardinals, when they were already down star running back Nick Chubb. They would lose Kareem Hunt, and once again, Baker would re-injure his left shoulder, forcing him to sit the final drive. This time, the injury would also have him miss the following game, and in an attempt to come back against the Steelers and Bengals, he would have a notable downtick in productivity, as again, against the Patriots, he would go down with a knee problem before finishing the season with a downgraded 8-9 and missing the playoffs. And Baker would throw for just 17 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. Now, I think a lot of people would go, okay, that's bad, but obviously the Browns were very injured this year, and Baker's own injuries were a big problem to his play, so he should go back to his normal self with a little R&R. But then out of the Browns camp, we would hear rumbles of them wanting someone more mature leading the team, that Baker just wasn't a great leader and they needed an adult in the room, which ultimately culminated in a July 6th trade to the Carolina Panthers. While this is a gut punch to be included in the name of first-round picks that would be traded away while on their rookie contract, what made it even worse is that if the Browns were the Darlas of the NFL, Baker Mayfield just realized he got traded to the quarterback equivalent of the Captain D's in this very confusing analogy. Since they had moved on from Cam Newton in 2018, the organization had fallen off a cliff. I'm talking about 3 5-11 seasons in a row, and somehow using 6 quarterbacks in 3 years, including Sam Darnold, with just none of them finding any sort of lasting success. So trading for Baker Mayfield, many were doubtful if he could do much better than what anybody else had done before him. So being in a worse physical place with his injuries, mixed with being in what I could only imagine being a much worse mental place with the trade, Baker would head down to my home state and not just have a bad showing, but in his first 5 games, gave us literally one of the worst quarterbacking performances of all time. Get this, since ESPN has started tracking quarterback rating in 2006, Baker Mayfield had the second worst. That's 520th of 521 candidates. It's even more impressive because in that stretch, they still beat the Saints. But he wasn't looking as mobile, he wasn't as accurate, he was taking lots of sacks. It's like we were watching a shell of a man known as Baker Mayfield play. And for me, I remember thinking, man, if he could just get out of the Panthers, I'm sure he could find some success. Well, and then they cut him, and he was just not picked up. He sat in free agency for 2 weeks as the league just kind of continued around him, as I'm sure he had to seriously sit with the idea that football may really be over for him. Until on a random Tuesday, he got a call from the Los Angeles Rams, who were in a bit of a rebuild season already, but on top of that, Stafford just went down with a concussion against the Cardinals, fought his way back before suffering another concussion against the Saints 2 weeks later, and despite his ability to probably get back before the end of the season, they were already 3-7 and really had no point in risking further injuries to their star quarterback. But still, the following 2 weeks, Bryce Perkins and John Wolford didn't give fans much hope. So looking to just put a little bit of juice back into this team, they call in Baker last minute and give him just a single day and a half to prep before their Thursday night game against the Las Vegas Raiders. So after slamming and studying the playbook, they actually had Wolford start, and well, they just run the ball 3 times and then punt it. But this was after a big Raiders drive to score, so in a too similar fashion, after the Raiders' ensuing field goal drive, Big Bake was facing down another 2-score deficit with the ball in his hands just the very first time this game. But this drive would go different. He fakes the handoff, looks to his right, and throws a dime into the chest of another brand new player. And just like that, Baker had a little life. Now, this drive would end in a field goal, but it didn't look half bad. Their ground game was continuing to struggle, but they were at least moving the ball a bit. Heck, even their ensuing drive, still down by 10, they would get just outside the red zone before fumbling it away. Now, the game would trudge on for a bit. Baker was consistently getting a little bit of traction every time, but never quite getting a big breakthrough, in no short part to the excellent punting of Raiders superstar punter AJ Cole, who had been starting them inside their 15 twice in the second half. This was until the start of the fourth. Things would eventually click. Through a 17-play marathon of a drive, requiring a defensive offside on a punt of all things to keep it alive, and a 4th down conversion from the 2-yard line without scoring, the Rams were suddenly within 6 points of the Raiders. But with just 3 minutes left, it was looking bleak. Yes, they stopped the Raiders one more time, but AJ Cole would look to end the game by himself, all the way from the ball at the 34-yard line, him inside of his own 20. He sets off a trademark Cole cock rocket, traveling 64 yards downfield and being down at the 2-yard line with just a minute and 45 seconds left in the game. So now, Baker, who had been with his team since Tuesday with only one practice with them and a dream, begins to drive. And the first pass was good, but caught just out of bounds. On 2nd and 10, he goes and throws a laser to find Outwell on an out route with an unbelievable amount of accuracy, putting it just where he could catch it, and maybe the most important play of his career, gets the pass interference call on a pass that was picked off. So the drive lives on, but cut down to 90 seconds, but things were looking to get bleaker with a sack. Bleaker for the Raiders, that is, because there's yet another flag as Tillery slaps the ball out of Baker's hands, which against a team without any timeouts after you just sacked them, it stops the clock and keeps them in a manageable position and giving them another first down, where finally they truly get punished as Baker slings it 32 yards downfield into double coverage, only where the wideout could catch it. And now they were cooking. 3 plays later, he's spiking the ball with 15 seconds left just outside the 23, where, the game on the line, he steps back, looks left, and immediately sees the matchup he likes and throws maybe one of the most unguardable throws you've ever seen. With just about 3 inches of space and an arm in the cradle of the receiver's chest, he completes one of the most unbelievable drives in under 2 days of notice, and not just played, but led a comeback win with a 98-yard game-winning drive. And from that spot on, he blossomed. Yeah, the Rams only won one more game with Baker quarterbacking, but it was against the Broncos where they dropped 51 on them, with Baker throwing a damn near perfect game as he only threw 4 incompletions, and suddenly it became clear that Baker could still play incredibly high levels of football. And with that momentum spurred on from this drive, he was able to nab a 1-year deal with the Buccaneers, who were in quarterback limbo after the retirement of Tom Brady, and we would get to see the player Baker was supposed to be finally come out for these past 2 years, as he has been a Pro Bowler both times and reached his highest completion percentage since being in the NFL last year, while throwing for 4,500 yards and 41 touchdowns, as he has taken the Buccaneers to the playoffs twice and helped them have a top 5 offense in 2024. And you may ask yourself, was this all really spurred on just by one single drive? And I think yes. Yes, it was.
Jefferson, is that possible?
And again, the accuracy downfield with receivers he's never thrown with.